Circling back to the conflict in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has agreed to implement a pause on energy infrastructure strikes during a phone call with his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump. The hour-long conversation marks a thaw in relations between both leaders following their heated exchange in the White House 3 weeks ago. Both sides agreed to work towards a truce. Mr. Trump also suggested that Washington takes ownership of Ukrainian power plants. The discussion comes just a day after Mr. Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He agreed to stop attacks on Ukrainian energy facilities, but stopped short of endorsing a full 30-day ceasefire. For more analysis, let's speak now with Harold James, Director of Program and Contemporary European Politics and Society at Princeton University. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, I want to get your reaction to Mr. Zelenskyy's acceptance of a limited ceasefire with Russia. What does this tell you about his current strategy and approach to ending the war?
Well, first of all, it's good news. It's important that we're making progress towards peace settlement. And it shows, I think, also that the United States is going to be a pretty key player in shaping the form of the solution to this issue.
I mean, there are no specific details yet on how this limited ceasefire will be monitored or enforced. What are your expectations or how it should be implemented, and what sort of key elements should it include?
Well, this is only a temporary ceasefire. It's for 30 days. And presumably, if it's successful, it can be extended. And it's also not a complete ceasefire, so people are still going to be fighting on the ground. It's just that the energy infrastructure is not going to be destroyed. And one of the things that's been terrifying over the last years has been the way in which Russian forces have been attacking again and again Ukrainian infrastructure, and the energy goes out and the lights go out. And then more recently, Ukraine started attacking Russian infrastructure and attacking oil refineries. So it's good that that's not taking place. But it will also be important that this is the framework within which some kind of negotiation can take place for a ceasefire and maybe an eventual, as it were, freezing of the conflict that will then have some kind of credible guarantees. But at the moment, there's no guarantee mechanism, so things are still very, very much in the air.
President Trump has sort of lost interest in the minerals deal now, suggesting that the U.S. could take over Ukrainian nuclear power plants. And Washington has said that American ownership would be the best protection for that infrastructure. In your opinion, are power plants now going to be part of negotiations to end this war?
I think they're going to be a step on the way to finding a negotiated solution. And one of the attractions of this is that if indeed this is somewhere where the United States has a strategic interest, the thought is that Russia will be more hesitant in attacking those facilities. And so in that sense, an American presence gives some kind of security. But the United States clearly is not going to put troops into Ukraine. And President Trump has made that very, very clear over and over again, that there are not going to be American troops. He's also skeptical, really, about European troops, and the Russians are pushing back on the idea of British or French soldiers. At some point, I believe there will need to be a peacekeeping force, and there will need to be a peacekeeping force on wherever the demarcation line lies. It's unlikely at the moment that the whole of Ukrainian territory occupied by Russia will be given back, or that the frontiers will be restored back to what they were before the conflict broke out. And that's in 2014, because this conflict has really been going on since 2014.
Would President Zelenskyy consider agreeing to the U.S. control over these power plants?
I don't think it's implausible at all. We have very often plants in many, many countries that are operated by foreign countries, and it gives, I think, a degree of security. It's a very ingenious way of providing a first element of a security guarantee.
Zelenskyy describes the call with Trump as positive, as substantive.
Those are definitely not words he would have used for their earlier meeting at the White House. How significant is this turn in tone in their relationship? You know, is Trump being wooed back to Zelensky's corner?
Well, it's a complicated balancing act, and I think there was an unfortunate aspect, obviously a very unfortunate aspect, about the February 28th meeting. That was played out in front of the television cameras, and Zelensky was humiliated, and it looked, from the perspective of Ukrainians, from the perspective of many people in Europe, all over the world, that a small country was being bullied by a big country, and that the United States was aligning itself very, very clearly with Russia. And that seems to have ended now. So it's a better position. And I hope that there is some recognition that 28th of February meeting was counterproductive. It didn't do anything, for instance, to get Russia to negotiate more seriously.
And speaking of negotiations, there are several Russian red lines, including a full end to any Western military aid for Ukraine, which some observers consider a non-starter. How likely is it that Mr. Trump will be able to balance these demands without compromising Ukraine's ability to defend itself?
It is, to me, really unthinkable that Ukraine can be left without any kind of defense. And a lot of the defense that is provided is not in the form of material assistance, but in the form of intelligence and in the form of observation, information about where drone attacks are taking place, where ballistic missiles are coming from. So you really need to keep this in order to make the security of Ukraine in the future credible. Otherwise, and this is fundamentally the basic problem with all of the negotiation, that often Russia comes back to the position that the fundamental causes of the conflict need to be addressed. And for Russia, the fundamental causes of the conflict are simply Ukrainian independence and the existence of Ukraine. Putin made that very clear in a famous essay that he wrote, published in the summer of 2021, just before the new attack on Ukraine, which was entitled On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians. So if that's the fundamental cause, you can't deal with it. And I think you have to really set aside those fundamental causes. It's also unthinkable at the moment that Russia is simply going to move out of the areas that it's occupied. And so from the Ukrainian perspective, you don't want to have a recognition of the permanence of a line that Ukrainians believe is illegitimate.
Thank you very much for your thoughts today, sir. Harold James, he is director of the program in Contemporary European Politics and Society at Princeton University.